Please note before I begin this video that while I'm not exactly a fan of the Japanese heavy metal idol group Baby Metal, my brain at least acknowledges their existence, whereas at the very best I regard the film Baby Driver with cold and dismissive contempt. So if at any point during this video I accidentally say Baby Metal instead of Baby Driver, while it's not exactly a Freudian slip, it's simply that Baby Driver, I managed to actually get it right there, is just one of those movies that happens to slide right off my brain and are replaced in the back of my mind with something that my subconscious finds even remotely interesting. Still, having hopefully made that clear and doing my very best to remain focused and professional. Hello there, this is James Scrofty, 1978, and recently a friend of mine commissioned me to review the film Baby Driver, the 2017 movie written and directed by Edgar Wright, for the sole reason that being on the autistic spectrum himself, he is one of the many people who buys into the fan theory that the protagonist Miles, nicknamed Baby, is on the autistic spectrum as well. In fact, my friend even goes so far as to claim that the film passes what he calls the autistic Bechdel test, because he asserts that Doc's young nephew Sam is also autistic, and the two characters talk to each other about something other than being neuroatypical. However, cutting right to the chase, no. Sorry, bud, but I just don't see it. In spite of the supposedly defining scene in which Bats asks Doc if the kid is retarded, and Doc replies, "Retarded means slow. Is he slow?" I don't buy for a single second that Baby is an Aspie or an Autie, because, as I'll explain in a moment, symptoms and behaviour do not a diagnosis make. And the young boy Sam is merely the personification of the stereotype of the young, overweight American boy who never takes his eyes off his phone or his video game, and being the nephew of a master heist planner and a quote chip off the old block, can count and note the locations of all of the cameras, armed guards, tellers, customers and so forth in the post office in a few seconds without drawing any attention, while Baby is nervous and distracted, worrying about all of the people who are going to be killed tomorrow during the heist, and generally being a fish out of the water because this isn't his world. He's not a real criminal, and then the gut punch of the fact that an 8-year-old boy is a part of that world and a more astute criminal than Baby can ever be. Honestly, how do you not get this? But anyway, it's clear to me at least that in the film Sam can note the number and positions of everything, not because he's on the spectrum, but because he's been watching his uncle do it since he was the one taking him into the joints that he was casing in order to look less suspicious back when he was still a toddler in a stroller. Speaking of which, bearing in mind that the only reason Doc didn't simply case the post office himself, as he's apparently always done in the past, instead sending in Baby for the first and only time ever, was because the heat was on him and Doc couldn't risk being seen in there because that would tip off the authorities that it was the target of his next heist. Considering that he presumably had the same skills as his nephew, why doesn't anyone declare that Doc is autistic as well? Do you see the rhetorical point I'm making there? Just as you can't determine a person's sexuality by who they're with, who they have sex with, or how they behave, you can't diagnose any psychological, cognitive, neurological, or psychiatric condition based solely on symptoms or behaviour. For example, although people used to insist that I have OCD because I brush and floss my teeth all the time, the fact is that I have incredibly sensitive gums which swell up and bleed if I don't. In other words, a physical condition causes me to mimic what at least one person with OCD regarded as OCD behaviour, which brings me on to Baby's tinnitus, because once again, no, while my friend believes that it's merely a tacked-on plot contrivance to explain why Baby wears earphones to we ignorant neurotypicals, simply because he knows one autistic person who does the same thing, not because she has tinnitus, but because she's autistic. No, from the fact that the very first thing we hear during the opening titles and hear at key points throughout the movie is the ring of tinnitus, to the fact that it is a constant reminder of the crash that killed his mother, as well as his father, but his father was an abusive arsehole, so we aren't supposed to care about him, and thus his earphones are his escape from his tinnitus, and thus the guilt and pain they represent. Do you see how that works? Baby's tinnitus is symbolic and anything butt tacked on. As a matter of fact, although it's so blatantly obvious, at least as far as I'm concerned, that I didn't think I'd ever have to explain it, the earphones and sunglasses which Baby wears constantly while Doc and the real criminals are planning and executing a heist, along with the fact that he does his best to completely ignore and remains tight-lipped around the real criminals, are symbolism as well, underlining the moral that he doesn't, quote, belong in that world by showing rather than telling, while simply declaring that he's autistic, on the other hand, renders that entire aspect of the moral null and void. The not belonging in that world moral is then further underlined by the fact that he doesn't wear his earphones or sunglasses and is open and expressive when he's with Deborah or his foster father Joe. But you know what? Sod it. If you're so desperate to see autistic people being represented well on screen that you'll ignore all of these painfully blatant film school 101 cliches, then explaining them to you is a waste of time. Because in the end, just as I explained in my video reviewing the original Sailor Moon anime, links down in the underbar, when the audience is this desperate for representation, they'll happily eat shaving foam and declare it to be the best ice cream they've ever tasted. Not that projecting autistic representation onto Baby is anywhere near as much of a condemnation of society as declaring Sailor Moon to be the greatest female role model of all time, because Baby is actually a pretty good character, while on the other hand, as I explained in my Sailor Moon video links below, Sailor Moon being the one-eyed girl in the Kingdom of the Blind simply proves just how grossly misogynistic our cultures and societies remain to this day. However, even if Edgar Wright stated on the record that he wrote Baby to be autistic and as a director, deliberately hired a coach to help the actor aut it up for the sole purpose of raising awareness about autism spectrum disorders, and then simply didn't bother to tell anybody, least of all the studio's marketing and PR departments. No different from the Power Rangers movie that was also released last year, this still wouldn't save the film from being an intolerably cliched pile of pig manure, one that breaks one of the cardinal rules of filmmaking as soon as it begins by reminding us of a much better film that we could be watching instead, specifically Hudson Hawk. Because, sorry Edgar, but although your movie deserves to be nominated for the Oscars for Best Film Editing, Best Sound Editing and Best Sound Mixing, simply because the music is so perfectly in sync with the action, Hudson Hawk already did the whole thing of timing a crime and or action scene by a song, and was much more fun to watch in my humble opinion.
You figure this out all by yourself?
Yeah.
Good plan, Junior.
We got about 5 minutes and change.
5:32, swinging on a star.
You know, they invented something while you're inside. It's called a watch.
Hey, Tom. What? Would you like to swing on a star? Carry moonbeams home in a jar and be better off than you are? Or won't you rather be a mule?
A mule is an animal with long funny ears. He kicks up at anything he hears.
His back is brawny and his brain is weak. He's just plain stupid with a stubborn streak.
And by the way, if you hate to go to school,
You may grow up to be a mule.
or would you like to swing on a star? Carry moonbeams home in a jar.
They're all back on.
And be better off than you are.
Or won't you rather be a fish?
Indeed, without its two unique selling points, one of which, as far as I'm concerned, exists solely inside the minds of people who are desperate enough to see what isn't there, and even if it is there, is so weak and meaningless that it may as well not be. Baby Driver is nothing but a formulaic string of cliches that we've seen 1,000 times before, executed 1,000 times better. A fundamentally honest man who was sucked into a life of crime against his will once out, and so he agrees to do one last job, only to discover that his criminal acquaintances won't let him go so easily. Where have I seen that before, except as the premise of half of all crime thrillers ever made? Baby's old, disabled, deaf foster father, who he now cares for, is merely an emotional sledgehammer to drive home the point of the story with all of the grace and subtlety of a tweet from Donald Trump. Deborah is simply the Romeo and Juliet personification of Baby's desire to escape, and seriously, no matter how little you have to stick around for, what kind of idiot agrees to drive away forever with someone who they literally just met a couple of days earlier? The only other female character who could laughably be described as being part of the main cast is also merely a love interest, the overly sexualized and thrill-seeking Bonnie to her husband's Clyde, who exists solely to be killed so that her husband will swear revenge. Then there's the homicidal maniac Bats, who claims that he only does drugs to support his robbery habit, and apparently only commits armed robberies to support his murder habit, because almost everywhere he goes, someone ends up dead. The only black man in the main cast aside from Old Joe, who being Baby's foster father, is apparently only black himself because he might as well hold up a sign saying, "Look, this film isn't racist, honest," in the kind of ignorantly colourblind way that Hollywood has long since mastered. And that's not even mentioning the massive plot holes towards the end of the film, like the fact that after Bats kills the crooked cops, having made the most obvious and cringeworthy pun imaginable, Doc is ready to call off the whole thing and order them all to leave the city, but Baby insists that they should go ahead with the heist, in spite of the reality that leaving the city and forgetting the whole thing is precisely what Baby wants. But no, all of the other criminals have to die when the heist goes horribly wrong, so that Baby can be truly free of them. And before you cry spoilers, what did I just say about that being the synopsis of about half of all crime thrillers ever made? When all is said and done, in fact, this film is a disgustingly predictable insult to civilization, the kind of thing that a properly programmed computer would churn out if you ordered it to mix the Fast and the Furious franchise with What's Eating Gilbert Grape. An utterly forgettable and meaningless pile of tripe which exists solely to slate an emotionally stunted audience's endless thirst for car chases, shootouts, action scenes, and romance as an allegory for wanting to escape and find a new life elsewhere.
No. Still alive. No. Fucking piece of shit. God. Look at me. Look at my fucking eyes. God.
As I subtly hinted at the beginning of this video, if you'd like to commission me to review any particular work, then do please get in touch. And if you like this video or any of my other work enough to believe that it's worth a donation, then my paypal.me link is listed down as your underbar. Just think of it as me passing around my busker's hat at the end of the performance.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.